Picture some of the best fights you've seen or read in fiction. What do these fights have in common? Good action? Obviously. High stakes? Absolutely. Excellent characters? Definitely. All of these components are needed not just to make a fight good, but to make a series as a whole good. Especially in the space of the battle shonen genre, you can't have a good series without good action, high stakes, and good, relevant characters. But it's that last category that I want to hone in on in the context of Sakamoto Days, because when it comes down to it, Sakamoto Days has a character problem. So what do I mean by a character problem? I don't mean to say that Sakamoto Days characters are bad. Sure, they aren't necessarily the most complex characters who have ever been written, but several of them are incredibly interesting, nuanced, and serve their purpose in the story extremely well. Shin, Sakamoto, and Nagumo are some easy examples to rattle off. However, beyond the main cast, many of Sakamoto Days' characters feel like they lack purpose, depth, and typically act as mere plot devices thrown out of the story as quickly as they were introduced, which makes them kind of wasted. Let's take a look at Lu. Lu was introduced in chapter 4 of the manga and was quickly phased out in terms of relevance. She partook in a few of the early arcs such as the Okutabi Lab arc and Death Row Inmate arc, but once the story actually got serious with the JAA invasion, she was practically removed entirely from it. The most we ever see of her nowadays is in official art from Suzuki himself or in the occasional chapter appearance, so she has essentially zero relevance to the plot. This seems like a big waste from Suzuki, considering Lu's ties to the Triad and her potential to usher in a wave of international assassins to the story, but considering the fact that Sakamoto Days isn't actually over yet, there's still a chance for Suzuki to make Lu relevant again, and for that reason, I consider Lu to be a less egregious example of a character's wasted potential, especially compared to the other characters I'll be talking about. A far more egregious example is Kaji. Kaji was introduced during the JCC exams arc as part of the special recommendation group alongside Shinaya and Toramaru. Later on in the same arc, Kaji helps Shin fight Shinaya, who's being piloted by Gaku, and Kaji is doing legitimately pretty well. He's able to dodge Shinaya's attacks, copy Gaku's moves to land a hit on him, and when working together with Shin, they're able to push Gaku into breaking the limits of Shinaya's body in order to beat them. By the end of the fight, Kaji is critically injured, but the story makes it seem like he'll be joining the main cast at the JCC. However, during the JCC infiltration arc, there is no mention of Kaji at all. In fact, we don't see him until 69 chapters later when he makes an appearance during the Assassin exhibition arc, and while there is an explanation offered as to why Kaji was absent during the JCC arc, his performance in the exhibition arc is downright pathetic. Shin had contacted Kaji because his special hearing would allow him to detect the bomb within the museum. Kaji does this within the same chapter he's reintroduced into the story, and then immediately gets one-tapped by Mafuyu and is made irrelevant again. The most he does for the rest of the arc is help Siba take the bomb out of Mafuyu and tell them that the bomb is still ticking. After this, he just disappears from the story after contributing next to nothing. For the initial hype Kaji got being introduced into the story as a special recommendation, and for a showcase of abilities in his fight against Shinaya, I think it's a real shame to have Kaji made so irrelevant so quickly. It's obvious that he was brought back just to detect the bomb in Mafuyu, making Kaji a mere plot device and an incredibly short-lived one at that. Rather than reintroduce a character into the story only to make them irrelevant in the same chapter, I would have rathered Suzuki allow the gang to detect the bomb in Mafuyu in a different manner because it removes the unnecessary clutter of a side cast that ultimately feels lifeless and two-dimensional. While we're talking about Kaji, I think it's fair to take a look at Toramaru too. Like Kaji, she was introduced as a special recommendation and went on to put up a good fight against both Shin and Shinaya. Following this, she's one of two students Gaku saw potential in and subsequently got kidnapped with Mafuyu in order to work for Uzuki's gang. This plot point is partially the reason Sakamoto's gang goes to Thailand, and is essentially the initial reason Sakamoto's gang enters the Assassin exhibition. She's clearly made out to be decently strong, at least not when compared to people who are order level, and her safety is a major concern for the first part of the exhibition arc since the bomb goes off if she dies. However, unlike Mafuyu, who got a major fight and a flashback, Toramaru gets comparatively little. She's able to run into Sakamoto, who just bodies all the guards in a single chapter, and her little moment of becoming a Sakamoto fan again is never treated like a serious character development. After this, she's made irrelevant again as the second phase of Uzuki's plan starts, and she's never to be seen again. As far as I know, we don't even get a concrete answer as to what happened to her after the exhibition arc. She just disappears. Now, I understand that it might have been too much for Suzuki to balance the Mafuyu fight with Toramaru's own fight, and it is definitely easier to essentially write her out of the story in like 3 chapters, but to have Toramaru painted as a next generation assassin with high amounts of potential, to have her actively train with members of Uzuki's gang, and to have her be a major plot point for the beginning of the exhibition arc only to be written out once the villains arrive, leaves me feeling unsatisfied. Toramaru ultimately ended up as yet another plot device with little in the way of character development. Despite the past 2 examples being pretty solid showings of wasted potential, I think this character problem affects no other group more than the villains. Of the people in Uzuki's gang, we currently have Uzuki, Kashima, and Kumanomi, who are alive, Kanaguri, who is not even really part of the gang anymore, Akira, who is not even really a villain, and Tenkyu, who is currently dying. Gaku's fate is unconfirmed, Haruma, Uda, and Carolina Reaper are dead, and Club Jam disappeared after the JCC infiltration arc. The villains of the story feel like they're introduced just so the protagonists have someone to fight for an arc, and after that happens, they're just cast aside or made into a joke. Take Club Jam, for instance. He was introduced after Mafuyu and Toramaru got kidnapped as a new member of Uzuki's gang with an eccentric personality. He shows up to find the database, loses his fight, and then is never seen again. In Club Jam's case, nobody really likes him, so it doesn't hurt as much to see him disappear, but the principle still applies. He's brought into the story literally just to act as a punching bag and power check for Shin and his friends. Carolina Reaper is even worse off. He legitimately has a cool power, a real motivation after Club Jam lost his fight, and even has implications for a pretty harrowing backstory when he reveals his left eye. Despite this, he gets one showing during the exhibition arc where he just fails to kill Amane, injures Shishiba once, and then gets one-tapped by Osaragi. Haruma has similar conditions too. He's introduced alongside Kumanomi and is implied to be really strong given Gaku's reaction to hearing that he would be returning from Thailand, but he doesn't actually do anything until the exhibition arc. He does get a really small showing when he captures Ario Muto, but the guys he bodies are literally feetless and nameless. From there, he fails to deal significant damage to Shishiba when literally fighting a 2v1, technically beats Shin but admits that he did a serious amount of damage, and then pulls up to fight Takamura, which only results in him getting cut in half. Haruma gets one arc to actually do something, and it's the same arc that he dies in. Lastly, we have Tenkyu. Tenkyu was introduced in the latest prison arc and proceeded to lose his first real fight that we ever see him in, also being put near death. At this point, the villains are full of wasted potential from all the members we've seen get cooked in their debut fights. Suzuki does a masterful job creating unique character designs, powers, and fighting styles, but that's typically put to waste because the villains never get more than one fight to show that off before being reduced to punching bags for the protagonists. They're more plot devices to power up the main cast rather than legitimate threats to the story. As of right now, neither Gaku nor Tenkyu's fates are confirmed, but if they really did die, then I think it would be a massive L for the series and would be a legitimate showing of wasted potential.